Tycoon wanted his ex to suffer at his wedding, but she showed up with his wife and twins. The early morning fog rolled across the San Francisco Bay as Alexander Chan stood at the panoramic window of his penthouse office. 40 stories below, the city was just awakening, unaware of the man who had reshaped its skyline over the past decade. The gleaming Chen Towers, a complex of ultra-luxury apartments and offices, cast long shadows over the neighborhoods where he had once lived in a cramped two-bedroom apartment with his parents and 3 siblings. "Mr. Chan, your 8 a.m. is waiting." His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Alexander straightened his custom Brioni suit and adjusted his Patek Philippe watch. "Tell them 5 minutes." He allowed himself another moment to gaze at his empire. At 35, Alexander Chan had transformed from the son of struggling Taiwanese immigrants to one of California's most powerful real estate moguls. The journey played through his mind like a highlight reel of calculated victories. "You will be nothing without an education," his father had told him 20 years ago, his calloused hands trembling after a 16-hour shift at the restaurant. "Study hard. Never show weakness." Alexander's jaw tightened at the memory. He had done more than study. He had clawed his way up, leveraging every connection, exploiting every opportunity, and eliminating anyone who stood in his way. The boardroom fell silent as Alexander entered. 6 executives in expensive suits straightened their postures, eyes following his movement to the head of the table. They weren't friends. In Alexander's world, there were only assets and obstacles. "The Harrison Street property," Alexander began without preamble, his voice cool and measured. "The owners are refusing our offer." A nervous executive cleared his throat. "They're a family-owned business, sir. 3 generations. They're not interested in selling at any." "Triple the offer," Alexander interrupted. "Then leak to the city inspector about their code violations. I want that property by the end of the month." "But sir, there aren't any code violations." Alexander's dark eyes locked onto the man. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "There will be." Later that evening, in the privacy of his chauffeured Bentley, Alexander reviewed the wedding preparations on his tablet. The Napa Valley venue alone cost more than what his parents had earned in their entire lives. The guest list included tech billionaires, state senators, and Hollywood celebrities, all witnesses to his ultimate triumph. His phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. "Dinner with my parents tonight. Don't be late this time." Alexander didn't reply. Evelyn Park was beautiful, cultured, and most importantly, the daughter of James Park, whose banking connections would be instrumental in Alexander's next phase of expansion. Their marriage would cement his position among San Francisco's elite. Love had nothing to do with it. As the car glided through the city streets, Alexander's mind drifted to the special invitation he had sent 2 days ago. The memory of Melissa Thompson's face when she had rejected his proposal 5 years earlier still burned. She had chosen her medical career over him, as if her work saving lives could possibly compare to the empire he was building. "No one rejects Alexander Chan," he whispered to the tinted window, his reflection staring back with cold determination. "And those who do pay the price." His phone buzzed again, his wedding planner confirming that all invitations had been received, including the special one he had hand-delivered. Alexander smiled for the first time that day, imagining Melissa's face when she opened it. The wedding wouldn't just be a business merger with the Park family. It would be his moment of sweet revenge. The memory of Melissa lingered as Alexander's car pulled into the exclusive Pacific Heights neighborhood. 5 years had passed, but certain wounds refused to heal, especially those inflicted on his pride. Alexander stepped into his penthouse, loosening his tie. The magnificent space, with its museum-quality art and panoramic views, felt emptier than usual tonight. He poured himself 2 fingers of 30-year-old Macallan and walked to his study, where a particular photograph caught his attention despite his best efforts to ignore it. He hadn't meant to keep it. The picture showed Alexander and Melissa on a rare vacation in Maui, her curly hair wild in the ocean breeze, her smile uninhibited. He looked different then. Younger, certainly, but also lighter somehow. "Damn it," he muttered, tossing back the scotch. The memories flooded back unbidden. Their first meeting at a hospital charity gala where Alexander had donated a substantial sum mainly to network with potential investors. Melissa, then a third-year resident, had approached him not with flattery but with genuine questions about his philanthropic intentions. Most people who donate that kind of money want their name on a building, she had challenged him, dark eyes skeptical beneath the bright lights. What do you want, Mr. Chun? He had been intrigued by her directness, a refreshing change from the sycophants who typically surrounded him. Their courtship had been intense. Alexander remembered their third date, a private dinner on his yacht in the bay. My father worked 16-hour days in a restaurant kitchen, he had told her, surprising himself with the disclosure. I promised myself I'd never smell like cooking oil or bow to anyone. Melissa had touched his hand then, her fingers warm against his. There's no shame in honest work, Alex. My mom cleaned houses to put me through college. That kind of sacrifice is honorable. Alexander had withdrawn his hand. Honor doesn't build empires. As their relationship deepened, Alexander had begun planning their future together. His future with Melissa as a carefully positioned accessory. The disastrous proposal played in his mind with painful clarity. They had been in his penthouse, champagne chilling, the ring, a flawless 5-carat diamond, waiting in his pocket. The city lights twinkled below them through floor-to-ceiling windows. I've been offered the fellowship at Johns Hopkins, Melissa had announced, her face radiant with excitement. It's the opportunity of a lifetime, Alex. Only 2 doctors nationwide were selected. Alexander's carefully orchestrated moment faltered. Baltimore? That's on the opposite coast. Just for 2 years, she'd replied, her smile dimming slightly. We can make it work. You have business in D.C. sometimes, right? We could. I have something to ask you, he had interrupted, pulling out the velvet box. He had watched her eyes widen as he opened it, revealing the ring that had cost more than most people's homes. Alexander, marry me, he had said, not quite a question. Be my wife. I'll buy us a house wherever you want in the Bay Area. You can work at any hospital here. I'll make some calls. You won't need that fellowship. Her expression had shifted from surprise to something else. Confusion, then dawning comprehension. You want me to give up the fellowship? This is the specialization I've been working toward for years. You'll have other opportunities, he had insisted, irritation creeping into his voice. Better ones. I can arrange. Melissa had stepped back. You think you can arrange my career like it's a business deal? Don't be dramatic. I'm offering you everything. Everything except what matters to me. Her voice had quieted, which somehow made it worse. I love you, Alexander, but I won't be the kind of woman who abandons her dreams because a man decides they're inconvenient. The memory of what followed still made his chest tighten. The argument had escalated, with Alexander unable to comprehend her refusal. He had offered her wealth, status, security. How dare she reject him? You'll regret this, he had finally said, cold fury replacing his initial hurt. No one walks away from me. The ring had gone back in its box, and Melissa had walked out the door, tears streaming down her face. That's the problem, Alex. You think love is ownership. Alexander drained his glass, the expensive scotch burning a path down his throat. In the 5 years since, he had systematically eliminated Melissa from his life, blocking her number, instructing his staff never to mention her name. When he learned she had returned to San Francisco after her fellowship, he had made discreet calls to hospital board members he knew, suggesting she might not be a team player. The wedding invitation he had sent to her current address had been his first acknowledgement of her existence in years. He imagined her opening it, seeing his name alongside Evelyn's, realizing what she had lost. His phone buzzed again, a reminder about tomorrow's meeting with the wedding planner. Alexander set down his empty glass and stroked the smooth paper of the invitation sample on his desk. Perfect, he murmured, tracing the embossed letters of his and Evelyn's names. The elaborate invitation represented everything Melissa had rejected: wealth, status, Alexander himself. Sending it had been calculated cruelty, and he had savored every moment of the planning. 3 weeks before the wedding, Alexander sat across from Diane Holbrook, San Francisco's most exclusive wedding planner, in the private room of Quint's restaurant. The space had been reserved for them alone, a privilege that cost 5 figures but afforded the privacy Alexander required. "The seating chart is finalized," Diane said, sliding an elegantly bound portfolio across the table. "Though I'm still not clear on your instructions for table 19. Alexander dabbed his lips with a napkin, savoring the last bite of his Wagyu steak. "What's not clear?" "Ms. Thompson sits at table 19. Alone." Diane's perfectly maintained composure slipped for just a moment. "Mr. Chun, table 19 is positioned directly in front of the sweetheart table. It seats 10, and you've instructed that only one guest be seated there." "Exactly." Alexander's smile didn't reach his eyes. "And the champagne service for that table should be impeccable. I want her glass never less than half full." Diane cleared her throat. "Most couples want their guests to feel comfortable. This arrangement would be conspicuous." "That's the point," Alexander said, his tone making it clear the discussion was over. "Now, about the toast schedule." Later that evening, Alexander stood on the balcony of his Napa Valley estate, overlooking the vineyard where the ceremony would take place. Workers were already setting up the infrastructure for what the society pages were calling the wedding of the decade. Rows of white chairs faced an altar framed by ancient oak trees. Beyond that, a clear tent larger than most homes was being erected for the reception. "Is this all really necessary?" Evelyn appeared beside him, wrapped in a cashmere shawl against the evening chill. Her beauty was undeniable. Refined features, elegant posture, and the confidence that came from generations of wealth. 600 guests seems excessive. Alexander put his arm around her waist, a gesture more possessive than affectionate. "This isn't just a wedding, Evelyn. It's a statement." "About what?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes searching. Alexander turned to face the vineyard again. "About who we are, what we represent." His phone chimed with a notification. The specialized tracking service he'd paid handsomely for had confirmed. The invitation to Melissa Thompson had been delivered and signed for earlier that day. A cold smile played at his lips as he imagined Melissa opening the heavy cream envelope, recognizing his name embossed in gold leaf alongside Evelyn's. Would she cry? Would she feel that same gut punch he had felt when she chose her career over him? "I've been meaning to ask," Evelyn said, interrupting his thoughts. "Who is this Melissa person you added to the guest list last minute? You've never mentioned her." Alexander tensed almost imperceptibly. "An old acquaintance. Someone I haven't seen in years. Must be an important acquaintance to warrant a last-minute invitation to our already overcrowded wedding." Evelyn's tone remained casual, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "Just tying up loose ends," Alexander replied, pulling her closer to change the subject. "Have you decided on your final jewelry selection for the ceremony?" Later that night, in his study at the Napa estate, Alexander reviewed his speech for the reception. The standard gratitudes and platitudes filled the first page, but it was the second page he lingered on, the part he would deliver while looking directly at table 19. "Some people can't recognize value when it's offered to them," he read aloud to the empty room, savoring each word. "They choose fleeting accomplishments over lasting legacy. But time reveals all mistakes, doesn't it?" He set the paper down and opened his laptop, clicking through to a hidden folder of old photographs. Melissa at various events, unaware she was being photographed. One in particular caught his attention. Melissa in scrubs, exhaustion evident on her face as she left San Francisco General at what must have been the end of a grueling shift. Alexander had received it 3 days ago from the private investigator he'd hired to track her movements. The PI's report indicated she was now working at a community clinic in Oakland rather than at one of the prestigious hospitals her qualifications merited. His sabotage had been effective. The wedding invitation wasn't just an invitation. It was a precisely aimed arrow designed to pierce whatever armor Melissa had built around herself. Table 19 wasn't just a seat. It was a stage where her humiliation would be displayed for all of San Francisco's elite to witness. Alexander's phone rang, displaying his wedding planner's number. "Ms. Holbrook, it's late," he answered, irritation evident in his voice. "I apologize for the hour, Mr. Chun, but there's been a response from Ms. Thompson." Alexander sat up straighter, something tightening in his chest. "And she's accepted the invitation." A beat of silence followed as Alexander processed this information. He had expected her to decline, to avoid the confrontation. Her acceptance suggested either masochism or something more concerning, confidence. "Mr. Chan, are you still there?" "Yes," he said finally. "Make sure everything for table 19 is arranged exactly as I specified. And Diane, have security keep a special eye on Miss Thompson during the event. I want to know her every movement." After ending the call, Alexander stared at the acceptance notice forwarded to his email. The simple "Melissa Thompson accepts with pleasure" seemed to mock him from the screen. "You think you're prepared for this?" he whispered to the empty room. "You have no idea what's coming." He closed his laptop with more force than necessary and poured himself another drink. As the amber liquid swirled in his glass, Alexander mentally rehearsed the moment when Melissa would have to watch him marry Evelyn, when she would sit alone at table 19 while hundreds of influential guests wondered why, when he would raise his glass during his speech and subtly destroy whatever remained of her dignity. The revenge would be complete, the rejection avenged, the memory of his humiliation finally erased. I'll pick up right where the previous segment ended, with Alexander feeling uneasy about Melissa accepting the invitation. I'll now shift perspective to show how Evelyn and Melissa actually met and what's happening behind Alexander's back. 2 weeks before the wedding, Evelyn Park stood in the crowded ballroom of the Four Seasons, champagne flute in hand, performing her usual role as the poised fiancée of Alexander Chan. The Pediatric Cancer Foundation Gala had drawn San Francisco's wealthiest residents, all eager to be seen supporting the cause while networking with peers. Alexander had made a substantial donation, not out of particular concern for sick children, Evelyn knew, but because 3 tech billionaires he was courting for his next development project were on the foundation's board. "Darling, I need to speak with Robert about the zoning issue," Alexander murmured in her ear, his hand pressing possessively against the small of her back. "Mingle with the Goldmans if you can. They're considering moving their family office to our new financial district property." Evelyn nodded, the practiced smile never leaving her face. "Of course." As Alexander disappeared into the crowd, she exhaled slowly. These brief moments of solitude had become increasingly precious as the wedding approached. The constant performance exhausted her, though she'd never admit it, not even to herself. Evelyn drifted toward the bar, needing a moment away from the expectations that hung around her like her heavy diamond earrings. The bartender had just handed her a fresh glass of champagne when someone bumped into her, causing the golden liquid to splash onto her silk gown. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," came a hurried apology. Evelyn turned to find a woman with curly dark hair frantically offering a cocktail napkin. Despite the designer dress she wore, something about her seemed out of place among the gala's usual crowd, a genuineness that stood out amid the manufactured pleasantries. "It's fine, really," Evelyn assured her, accepting the napkin. The dress was probably due for retirement anyway. The woman laughed, a warm sound that seemed to cut through the artificial atmosphere of the event. "I'm Melissa Thompson. I'm filling in for a colleague tonight. Pediatric oncology isn't actually my specialty, but apparently they needed more doctors to parade around for the donors." "Evelyn Park," she replied, then watched as Melissa's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, recognition, followed by something harder to identify. "Park? As in Evelyn Park, engaged to Alexander Chan?" Melissa asked, her voice carefully neutral. A familiar weight settled in Evelyn's chest, the constant reduction to her relationship status. "The very same," she confirmed with a practiced smile. "Though I do occasionally have my own identity." Melissa seemed to study her face for a moment too long. "I'm sorry, that was rude of me. It's just, I knew Alexander once." Something in Melissa's tone, a particular heaviness, caught Evelyn's attention. She had heard Alexander's name spoken many ways, with admiration, envy, fear, respect, but never quite like this. "You worked with him?" Evelyn asked, though she suspected this wasn't a professional connection. Melissa hesitated. We were together for 5 years. The champagne suddenly tasted bitter in Evelyn's mouth. I see. He never mentioned. I'm not surprised. Melissa's smile was sad now. Alexander is very good at rewriting his own history. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, filled with unasked questions. I should go, Melissa said finally. Again, I'm sorry about your dress. Wait, Evelyn found herself saying. Would you like to get some air? It's stifling in here. Minutes later, they stood on the hotel's rooftop garden, the San Francisco skyline glittering around them. The night air was cool against Evelyn's skin, carrying the faint scent of the bay. How long has it been since you and Alexander? Evelyn asked, surprising herself with her directness. 5 years. Melissa leaned against the railing. We broke up when I accepted a fellowship at Johns Hopkins. He didn't take it well. Evelyn nodded slowly. He doesn't handle rejection gracefully. That's an understatement. Melissa looked out at the city lights. He told me I'd regret choosing my career over him. When I came back to San Francisco after my fellowship, I discovered he'd blacklisted me at every major hospital. I work at a community clinic in Oakland now. The information settled like a stone in Evelyn's stomach. That sounds like Alexander, she admitted quietly. Can I ask you something? Melissa turned to face her. Are you happy with him? The question caught Evelyn off guard. Not because it was intrusive, but because no one had ever asked her that before. Not her status-obsessed parents. Not her friends who envied her engagement to one of California's most eligible bachelors, and certainly not Alexander himself. Happiness wasn't really the point, she heard herself saying. It was a good match. Our families, our backgrounds. I understand, Melissa said, and Evelyn believed she truly did. We make the choices that seem right at the time. They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Melissa spoke again. I received an invitation to your wedding. Her voice was careful, measured. It seemed odd, given our history. Evelyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. I wasn't aware you were invited. Table 19, apparently. Just me, alone at a 10-person table. The strategic cruelty of it was so distinctly Alexander that Evelyn couldn't even pretend to be surprised. He's punishing you, she said flatly. Using our wedding as some sort of revenge. I figured as much. Melissa's eyes were kind as they met Evelyn's. I'm telling you this because, well, I wish someone had warned me about who Alexander really is before I spent 5 years with him. Evelyn's phone buzzed. Alexander, wondering where she'd gone. She silenced it and slipped it back into her clutch. I should get back, she said, though everything in her wanted to stay in this moment of unexpected honesty. Thank you for this. I almost didn't come tonight, Melissa admitted. Now I'm glad I did. As they exchanged numbers, just in case, Evelyn had said. Something shifted in her perception, like a camera lens suddenly coming into focus. The grand wedding, the perfect engagement, the carefully curated relationship. All of it felt hollow in a way she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge before. 3 days later, Evelyn found herself in a small coffee shop in Oakland, far from Alexander's usual haunts. Melissa sat across from her, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. The invitations, the seating arrangement, the speech he's planning. It's all designed to humiliate you, Evelyn said, her voice low despite the privacy of their corner table. I found his notes in his study. Melissa's expression remained calm. I'm not surprised. Alexander always did have a flair for elaborate schemes. Don't you want to back out? Skip the wedding. That's what he expects me to do. Melissa took a sip of her tea. Running would only confirm what he believes, that he has power over me. Evelyn studied the woman across from her, this person who had once loved the same man she was about to marry. There was a quiet strength in her that Evelyn envied. What if? Evelyn hesitated. The thought that had been growing in her mind over the past days feeling both terrifying and exhilarating. What if we gave him a surprise of our own? Melissa raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I've been finding things, documents, emails, things about his business practices, about how he's treated people, about how he's planning to use my family's connections. Evelyn leaned forward. I know now why he's marrying me, and it has nothing to do with love. Are you saying you want to call off the wedding? I'm saying I want him to feel what it's like to be humiliated, Evelyn replied, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. The way he planned to humiliate you, the way he's manipulated both of us. A slow smile spread across Melissa's face. I'm listening. As they talked, Evelyn felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Not the cold, practiced composure she had perfected as Alexander's fiancée, but something warmer, more genuine. For the first time in years, she was making a choice that wasn't predetermined by family expectations or social calculations. There's something else you should know, Melissa said finally, her expression growing serious. Something about Alexander that might change everything. There, Evelyn couldn't finish the sentence, her voice catching in her throat. Noah and Emma, Melissa supplied softly. They turned for last month. The coffee shop continued its ambient chatter around them, but Evelyn felt suspended in a bubble of silence, the implications crashing over her in waves. Alexander's children, she finally managed. You have Alexander's children. Melissa nodded, taking the photograph back gently. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after we broke up, 8 weeks along already with twins. Her finger traced the outline of the children's faces with a tenderness that made Evelyn's chest ache. I tried to tell him, called, texted, emailed. I even went to his office, but his security wouldn't let me pass the lobby. He blocked you completely? Evelyn whispered, remembering Alexander's methodical approach to eliminating people from his life. Yes, eventually, I received a cease and desist letter from his attorney, threatening legal action if I continued trying to contact him. Melissa's voice remained steady, but her eyes betrayed the old pain. By then I was showing. The fellowship at Johns Hopkins was starting. I had to make a choice. Evelyn reached across the table impulsively, covering Melissa's hand with her own. You chose your children and your career. I did. A smile ghosted across Melissa's face. It wasn't easy, being pregnant during a demanding fellowship, giving birth to twins with only my mother there to help. But we made it work. And Alexander never knew? All this time, Melissa's expression hardened. That's what I thought until last year. I needed financial help for the kids' preschool. Medical school loans don't pay themselves, so I finally filed for child support. I had DNA tests done, all the proper documentation. What happened? His lawyers contacted me within hours of the filing. They offered a settlement, a substantial one, if I would sign an NDA and never publicly acknowledge Alexander as the father. Melissa's voice turned bitter. He knew. He found out, and his only concern was keeping them a secret. Evelyn sat back, the perfect image of her fiancé shattering completely. Did you take it? The settlement? No. Melissa's chin lifted slightly. The agreement would have prohibited the children from ever knowing who their father was or contacting him. I couldn't sell their identity, their history, for any amount. The courage of this decision struck Evelyn forcefully. To refuse Alexander Chen's money on principle was almost unheard of in their circles. The case is still pending, Melissa continued. His lawyers have delayed it repeatedly. Meanwhile, Noah asks about his father. Emma draws family pictures with a question mark where a dad should be. Her composure cracked slightly. Do you know what it's like to look into your child's eyes and have no answer when they ask why their father doesn't want to meet them? Evelyn shook her head, words failing her. Last week, Noah came home crying because a classmate told him that dads don't leave unless the kids did something wrong. Melissa's eyes glistened with unshed tears. He asked me what he did wrong before he was even born to make his father not want him. That's... Evelyn struggled to find the words. I can't imagine. When that invitation arrived, Melissa's voice hardened again. With its gold embossing and calculated cruelty, something in me snapped. He doesn't get to pretend they don't exist. He doesn't get to start a perfect new life while denying his own children. The weight of this revelation pressed on Evelyn's chest. Her wedding wasn't just a business merger anymore. It was built on an even darker foundation than she had realized. "May I see them?" she asked suddenly. "Noah and Emma?" Melissa seemed taken aback. "You want to meet them?" "Yes, if that's okay." 2 days later, Evelyn found herself in Melissa's modest Oakland apartment. The space was small but filled with evidence of a loving home. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator. Colorful toys were neatly organized in bins, and photographs of Melissa with the twins documented their growth. The sound of small feet running down the hallway announced the children's arrival. They skidded to a stop when they saw Evelyn, suddenly shy behind their mother's legs. "Noah, Emma, this is Ms. Park. She's a new friend of mine," Melissa introduced, her hand gently resting on each child's head. "Hello," Evelyn said, kneeling down to their level. "I've heard so much about you both." Emma, bolder than her brother, stepped forward first. "Do you like dinosaurs?" she asked seriously. "I do," Evelyn replied, equally serious, "particularly the Triceratops." This was apparently the correct answer, as Emma's face lit up. "That's my second favorite. T-Rex is first because he's the boss." Noah remained cautious, studying Evelyn with an intensity that was eerily familiar. "Why are you dressed so fancy?" he finally asked. "Are you rich like the people in movies?" "Noah," Melissa chided gently, "that's not polite." "It's okay," Evelyn assured her. To Noah, she said, "I do have fancy clothes, but that doesn't make me any better than anyone else." He considered this, then nodded as if she'd passed some test. "Want to see my Lego spaceship? I built it myself. Mom only helped with the hard parts." As the afternoon progressed, Evelyn found herself drawn into their world. She helped Noah add a new wing to his spaceship and listened as Emma explained, in great detail, the hierarchy of her dinosaur collection. They were bright, curious children with Alexander's intelligence but none of his coldness. Later, when the twins were occupied with a movie, Evelyn and Melissa sat at the small kitchen table. "They're amazing," Evelyn said quietly. "So much life in them. They're everything to me." Melissa glanced toward the living room where the children were giggling at something on screen. "Sometimes I see Alexander in them, Noah's focus, Emma's strategic thinking, but they have something he lost somewhere along the way. Empathy. Joy." Evelyn twisted the massive engagement ring on her finger. "I can't marry him," she said finally, the decision crystallizing as she spoke it aloud. "Not just because of the twins, but because of everything. The man I thought I knew doesn't exist. What will you do?" "End it, of course, but not quietly." Evelyn's voice took on a new resolve. "Not in a way that lets him maintain his perfect image. Your family. My family has been pushing me to be the perfect accessory my entire life. This might actually be the first real choice I've ever made." Evelyn looked at the twins again, then back to Melissa. "And what about you? What do you want?" "I want my children to know their father isn't a question mark," Melissa said simply. "Not because I still have feelings for Alexander, but because they deserve to know where they come from, for better or worse." A plan began to form in Evelyn's mind, reckless perhaps, but with a poetic justice that appealed to her newly awakened sense of autonomy. "What if," she began slowly, "instead of avoiding his revenge, we walk straight into it, but on our terms, not his?" "What do you mean?" "Alexander invited you to the wedding to humiliate you. He seated you alone at table 19 so everyone would see your isolation, your supposed failure." Evelyn leaned forward. "But what if you weren't alone at that table?" Melissa's eyes widened as she caught Evelyn's meaning. The twins. Yes, his own children front and center at his wedding. The secret he paid to keep hidden, revealed in the most public way possible. "That would destroy him," Melissa whispered, looking both terrified and fascinated by the idea. "It would force him to confront the truth," Evelyn corrected. "And isn't that what both of us want? The truth." Finally acknowledged. As the children's laughter drifted in from the living room, The two women began to outline a plan that would change all their lives irrevocably. For Evelyn, it felt like stepping off a precipice, terrifying but exhilarating in its freedom. For Melissa, it was the culmination of years of solitary struggle, the chance to finally reclaim the narrative Alexander had tried to control. Alexander was working late again, which gave her the solitude she needed. The engagement ring sat heavy in her purse instead of on her finger, a small act of rebellion he hadn't yet noticed. She'd been wearing it for appearances during their public engagements but removing it in private, testing how it felt to shed the identity of Alexander Chen's fiancée. Evelyn poured herself a glass of wine and drifted toward Alexander's home office. She rarely entered this space. He valued his privacy, and she had always respected that boundary. But the woman who had obediently accepted his rules was disappearing with each passing day. The office door opened silently. Inside, the space was immaculate. A large glass desk, ergonomic chair, and walls lined with awards and photographs of Alexander with various celebrities and politicians. No personal mementos, no sign of sentimentality. Just power and accomplishment on display. Evelyn hesitated only briefly before sitting at his desk. The computer was locked, but she knew he kept important documents in the credenza behind his desk. The drawer slid open smoothly, revealing meticulously organized files. "What exactly am I looking for?" she murmured to herself, fingers trailing over the labeled tabs. A folder labeled Park Merger caught her attention. She frowned. They weren't merging businesses. They were getting married. Opening it revealed a detailed analysis of her family's banking connections, with potential profit margins highlighted and annotated in Alexander's precise handwriting. Her stomach tightened as she flipped through pages of strategies for leveraging her family's connections after the wedding. There were even contingency plans for, if the marriage terminates, complete with non-disclosure agreements and financial settlements based on duration. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hands beginning to shake. It really is just a business deal to him. She continued searching, finding another folder marked simply MT. Inside were documents related to Melissa, copies of the cease and desist letters, reports from private investigators tracking her movements, and most disturbing of all, emails between Alexander and board members at several San Francisco hospitals. "I would consider Dr. Thompson's hiring a personal affront." One email from Alexander read, "My family's continued donations would need to be reconsidered." The systematic destruction of Melissa's career lay documented in clinical black and white. Evelyn felt physically ill as she pieced together how Alexander had methodically closed doors for Melissa throughout the medical community, forcing her into the small clinic in Oakland. At the back of the folder, she found what appeared to be a preliminary settlement proposal regarding the twins, drafted by Alexander's attorneys. The language was cold, clinical, referring to Noah and Emma as the alleged Chen progeny, and outlining terms that would effectively erase Alexander's paternity in exchange for a trust fund that would activate when they turned 21. Evelyn was so engrossed in the documents that she didn't hear the front door open or the footsteps approaching the office. It was only when the light suddenly flicked on that she looked up, startled, to find Alexander standing in the doorway. "What are you doing?" His voice was dangerously quiet, his eyes moving from Evelyn to the open folders on his desk. She should have been frightened. A week ago, she would have apologized, made excuses. Instead, she felt oddly calm. "Learning the truth," she replied, holding up the settlement proposal. "About the kind of man I'm supposed to marry." Alexander's expression hardened as he stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. "You had no right to go through my private files. And you had no right to hide the fact that you have children," Evelyn countered, rising to her feet. "Twins, Alexander. 4-year-old twins you've never even met. Melissa told you. It wasn't a question. I should have known she couldn't keep her mouth shut." "Keep her mouth shut?" Evelyn's voice rose incredulously. "They're your children." Alexander moved to the bar cart in the corner of his office, pouring himself a whiskey with steady hands. "This is exactly why I kept it quiet. Dramatics, complications, distractions from what matters." "And what matters, Alexander? Your image? Your empire?" She gestured to the park merger folder. Or is it just the connections my family can provide for your next development project? He didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. Don't act naive, Evelyn. You knew what this was from the beginning. Your parents certainly did. The casual confirmation knocked the wind from her lungs. So our entire relationship has been transactional? Most relationships are, he replied coolly. Some people just prefer to dress them up with sentimentality. Evelyn looked at the man before her. Handsome, successful, entirely hollow, and wondered how she had ever convinced herself this was what she wanted. And Melissa? She asked. Was sabotaging her career part of the transaction too? A flicker of something, anger, regret, crossed his face. Melissa made her choice. She chose her career over me. So you decided to destroy that career? Evelyn picked up one of the emails. You realize how pathological this is, don't you? I realize that what happens in my personal life is none of your concern. He set down his glass with a sharp click. Put those files away and we'll forget this happened. Forget. Evelyn laughed. The sound brittle in the tense space between them. Like you forgot about Noah and Emma? Alexander's jaw tightened. Those children. Have your eyes? Evelyn cut in. Your jawline. Your precise way of studying a problem before solving it. They're brilliant, Alexander, and they wonder why their father doesn't want them. For a moment, something almost human flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by the cool mask she had come to recognize as his true countenance. The wedding is in less than 2 weeks, he said, changing tactics. Your father has already leveraged his position on the promise of our merger. Your mother has invited every social connection she's cultivated over the past 20 years. He stepped closer. Are you really prepared to walk away from all that? To disappoint everyone who's counting on you? The question hung in the air between them. The same question that had kept Evelyn trapped in this gilded cage for so long. What would people think? What would her family say? How could she possibly stand against the combined weight of expectations built over a lifetime? She thought of Noah and Emma, their innocent faces unmarred by the calculations and manipulations that defined the adult world. She thought of Melissa, who had chosen integrity over security. And she thought of herself, the woman she had been slowly becoming in the shadow of Alexander Chun, and the woman she might become if she finally stepped into the light. Yes, she said simply, I am prepared to walk away. The surprise on his face was worth whatever consequences might follow. Alexander Chun was not accustomed to rejection. Don't be ridiculous. You're upset. We'll discuss this tomorrow when you're thinking clearly. He moved toward the door, clearly considering the conversation over. I've never thought more clearly, Evelyn replied, gathering the most damning documents and sliding them into her purse. And this isn't a negotiation, Alexander. It's over. He turned back, eyes narrowing on her purse. What do you think you're doing with those? Insurance, she said. In case you decide to make things difficult. You're making a mistake. His voice had dropped to that dangerous register she'd heard him use in business negotiations. One you'll regret. Evelyn moved toward the door, stopping only when she was beside him. You know what the difference is between Melissa and me? She chose something better than you. I'm choosing to be better than the person who would marry you. She brushed past him, head high, heart hammering against her ribs. This isn't over, Evelyn, he called after her. She paused at the threshold, looking back at the man she had almost married. You're right about that. It's just beginning. In the elevator down to the lobby, Evelyn's hands shook as she pulled out her phone and dialed Melissa. I found everything, she said when Melissa answered. The emails to the hospitals, the settlement proposals, everything. He's been tracking you for years. Are you okay? Melissa's voice was concerned. Where are you now? Leaving the penthouse. Probably for the last time. Evelyn took a deep breath. I told him I know about the twins. That I'm done. Come here, Melissa said without hesitation. You shouldn't be alone right now. Alexander doesn't handle rejection well. Remember? The sounds of the city waking up, garbage trucks, early commuters, birds greeting the morning. Felt surreal after the confrontation with Alexander. Her phone had buzzed continuously for hours before she finally turned it off. 26 missed calls, 43 text messages, and an email from her mother with the subject line, "What have you done?" The sliding door opened behind her, and Melissa stepped out, already dressed in her scrubs for an early shift at the clinic. "You look like you haven't slept," Melissa said softly, joining her at the railing. "I don't think I can," Evelyn admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see his face when I told him it was over, like I was a malfunctioning appliance, not a person ending a relationship." Melissa nodded. "I remember that expression, like you've suddenly stopped performing according to the program he designed for you." "Exactly." Evelyn took a sip of her coffee, the bitter liquid matching her thoughts. "My mother called last night. Apparently, Alexander reached out to my father immediately after I left." "What did he tell them?" "That I'm having a pre-wedding emotional episode. That I stole confidential business documents under distress." Evelyn's laugh held no humor. "My father is worried about the banking connections, my mother about the social embarrassment. Neither asked if I was okay." Melissa's face softened with understanding. Families can be their own kind of prison. The sound of small footsteps interrupted them as Emma appeared at the door, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Her dark hair stood up in wild tufts, and she clutched a dinosaur plush toy. "Miss Evelyn is still here," she said, clearly pleased by this discovery. "Are you having a sleepover?" "Something like that," Evelyn smiled, opening her arms as Emma patted over for a morning hug. The child's unquestioning affection pierced her heart. "Can we have pancakes?" Emma asked, already assuming Evelyn was now part of the morning routine. "I have to go to work, sweetie," Melissa said, checking her watch. "But Ms. Jung from next door will be here in 15 minutes to take you and Noah to preschool. Maybe we can have pancakes tomorrow." Emma's face fell momentarily, but she recovered quickly. "Will you still be here tomorrow?" she asked Evelyn. The simple question carried unexpected weight. Where would she be tomorrow? The penthouse was unthinkable. Her parents' home in Pacific Heights would mean facing their disappointment and manipulation. Hotels felt too temporary, too adrift. "I'm not sure yet," Evelyn answered honestly. After Melissa left for work and the twins were collected by the neighbor, Evelyn finally turned her phone back on. It immediately began buzzing with notifications. A text from Alexander appeared first. "You have until noon to return the documents and reconsider your rash decision. After that, I can't guarantee the consequences will be pleasant for you or your new friend." Her stomach twisted. Of course, he would have already figured out where she went. Alexander's network of private investigators and security personnel was extensive. Another notification showed an email from her father's attorney, requesting an urgent meeting regarding premarital agreements and confidentiality concerns. As she scrolled through the barrage, a call came through her mother. With a deep breath, she answered. "Hello, Mother." "Evelyn, what on earth do you think you're doing?" Elizabeth Park's voice was tight with controlled fury. "Your father had to reschedule 3 meetings this morning because of this tantrum you're throwing." "It's not a tantrum, Mother. I'm breaking off the engagement." "Don't be absurd. The invitations have been sent. The governor is attending. The Chun Park merger is the social event of the year." "It's not a merger, Mother. It was supposed to be a marriage." Evelyn pinched the bridge of her nose, fighting back tears. "Though apparently I was the only one who didn't realize it was just business." "Of course it's business," Elizabeth snapped. "All marriages at our level are business arrangements first. Your father and I certainly were. Did you really think you were marrying for love like some character in a romantic comedy?" The blunt confirmation of what Evelyn had always suspected still stung. "Maybe not, but I at least thought basic honesty was part of the arrangement. Alexander called us last night, absolutely distraught. He said you broke into his private files and stole documents, that you've been acting erratically. He's worried about you, Evelyn." "He's worried about himself," Evelyn corrected. and what I might do with proof that he sabotaged a woman's medical career and abandoned his own children. A beat of silence followed. What children? His twins, a boy and girl. They're 4 years old, and he's never even met them. Saying it aloud renewed Evelyn's certainty. He's denied their existence, Mother. Paid lawyers to keep them secret. These complications happen in powerful men's lives, Elizabeth said finally, her voice lowered. It doesn't change the strategic benefits of the alliance. Evelyn closed her eyes, the callousness of the response cementing her resolve. It changes everything for me. I won't marry a man who abandons his children, who destroys a woman's career out of spite, who sees me as nothing more than a useful connection. And what will you do instead? Elizabeth's voice took on a dangerous edge. Where will you go? Your trust fund has conditions, Evelyn. Conditions your father is prepared to enforce. The threat hung in the air between them. Evelyn had never worked a day in her life. Her education, her apartment before moving in with Alexander, her lifestyle, all funded by family money that could disappear with a single phone call. I'll figure it out, she said, with more confidence than she felt. Alexander is willing to forgive this indiscretion, Elizabeth continued, softening her approach. Come home, return whatever you took, and we can all pretend this never happened. The wedding continues as planned. Your life continues as planned. For a moment, Evelyn felt the gravitational pull of the familiar, the easy path back to the life she had been groomed for since birth. Financial security, social status, her parents' approval. All she had to do was look away from what she now knew. Pretend she hadn't seen the truth about Alexander, about her parents, about the entire world she inhabited. Evelyn? Are you there? I'm here. She looked around. Melissa's modest apartment, the children's drawings on the refrigerator, the worn but comfortable furniture, the traces of a life built on love rather than calculation. But I'm not coming home. Don't be foolish. I've been foolish my entire life, Mother, following a script written by you and Father, never questioning whether it would make me happy. Evelyn's voice grew stronger with each word. For the first time, I'm thinking clearly, and I choose not to marry a man who would hurt innocent children to protect his image. You're making a terrible mistake, Elizabeth warned. One that will cost you everything. Maybe, Evelyn conceded, or maybe I'm finally doing something right. After ending the call, Evelyn sat in the quiet apartment, the weight of her decisions settling around her. She had just walked away from everything she had ever known. Family, security, identity. The vertigo of this newfound freedom made her dizzy. She wandered into the twins' bedroom, taking in the colorful space with its bunk beds and toy bins. A frame drawing hung on the wall, clearly done by one of the children, showing 3 stick figures, a tall one labeled Mom, and 2 smaller ones for Emma and Noah, off to the side. A 4th figure was drawn with a question mark for a face and labeled simply Dad. Something broke open inside Evelyn's chest as she stared at that question mark. These innocent children deserved better than a father who would deny their existence. Melissa deserved better than a man who would destroy her career out of wounded pride. And perhaps, Evelyn thought, she herself deserved better than to be a pawn in Alexander's empire-building strategy. Hours later, when Melissa returned from her shift at the clinic, she found Evelyn sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and her laptop. You look determined, Melissa observed, setting down her bag. I am. Evelyn looked up, a new resolve in her eyes. I've been thinking about what you said about choices and consequences, about standing up to Alexander. And my parents have made it clear they'll cut me off financially if I don't return to Alexander. His lawyers have already sent cease and desist letters demanding the return of the stolen documents. Evelyn pushed a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture that seemed more relaxed than her usual perfectly maintained appearance. I should be terrified. I've never been without a safety net before. But you're not terrified, Melissa observed. No, Evelyn smiled, the expression reaching her eyes for perhaps the first time since they'd met. I'm angry, and surprisingly, free. So what now? Melissa asked, sitting down across from her. Now we move forward with our plan. But I want to make one change. Evelyn's expression turned serious. I don't just want to expose Alexander at the wedding. I want to make sure he can never hurt anyone else the way he's hurt you. The way he's hurt Noah and Emma. Melissa studied her face. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we use these documents. Evelyn gestured to the evidence from Alexander's office. To do more than just embarrass him. I'm suggesting we use them to bring him to justice. That's a dangerous game, Melissa warned. Alexander has resources, connections. He won't go down without a fight. Neither will we, Evelyn replied, her voice steady with newfound conviction. I've spent my entire life being what other people wanted me to be. The perfect daughter, the suitable fiancé, the ornamental accessory. She reached across the table, taking Melissa's hand. But meeting you, meeting the twins, it's shown me what real courage looks like. What standing up for yourself looks like. Melissa squeezed her hand, tears forming in her eyes. What about your family? Your future? I don't know, Evelyn admitted. And that's terrifying. But also, she searched for the right word, exhilarating. As the afternoon faded into evening, the two women continued refining their plan, interrupted occasionally by the joyful chaos of the twins returning from preschool. Watching Melissa with Noah and Emma, patient, loving, strong. Evelyn felt a sense of certainty solidify within her. Mornings began with the cheerful chaos of getting the twins ready for preschool. A symphony of spilled cereal, mismatched socks, and Noah's insistence that his toy rocket ship needed to accompany him everywhere. Evelyn, who had never so much as packed her own lunch, found herself learning to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches cut into dinosaur shapes using Emma's special cookie cutters. No, you have to cut away the crust completely, Emma instructed seriously one morning, standing on a step stool beside Evelyn at the kitchen counter. Or else it tastes like grown-up food. I see, Evelyn replied with equal gravity, carefully trimming the edges. Is this acceptable, Chef Emma? The little girl inspected the sandwich with critical eyes before nodding. It's perfect. You're getting better at kid food. Something about the simple approval warmed Evelyn more deeply than any social compliment ever had. After the twins left for school, the apartment became a war room. Evelyn and Melissa spread documents across the kitchen table, building their case against Alexander piece by careful piece. They contacted a friend of Melissa's from law school who specialized in family law, arranging a consultation under strict confidentiality. These emails alone constitute career interference. The lawyer, Sarah Kim, told them, tapping the printed exchanges between Alexander and hospital board members. And the ongoing child support case has a much stronger position with this evidence of prior knowledge. What about the NDA he tried to force on Melissa? Evelyn asked. The one prohibiting her from ever acknowledging him as the father? Sarah's expression hardened. Unenforceable. No court would uphold a contract that permanently severs a child's right to know their biological parent. He was counting on intimidation, not legal standing. As they built their legal strategy, something else was building too. An unlikely friendship between two women who, under normal circumstances, would never have crossed paths. One evening, as they sat on Melissa's small balcony, sharing a bottle of wine after the twins were asleep, the conversation turned personal. I always envied women like you, Melissa admitted, swirling the wine in her glass. When I was with Alexander, he would take me to these events where everyone looked so perfect, so certain of their place in the world. I felt like an imposter. Evelyn laughed softly. That's the great irony. We're all imposters. Some of us are just better trained at faking it. She looked out at the modest Oakland neighborhood, so different from the manicured perfection of Pacific Heights. You know what I envied? Women who built their own lives, who knew who they were without a family name attached to their identity. It's not as romantic as it sounds, Melissa said. Being a single mother to twins while trying to rebuild a career that a vindictive ex systematically destroyed? There were nights I cried myself to sleep wondering if I'd made the right choice. Do you regret it? Standing up to him? Melissa was quiet for a long moment. No, she said finally. Even in my darkest moments, I never regretted choosing my integrity over his approval. And I certainly never regretted having Noah and Emma. She smiled softly. They're the best parts of me. They're extraordinary children, Evelyn agreed. You've done an amazing job raising them. They ask about him sometimes. Their father. Melissa's voice grew quieter. Noah especially. He sees friends with dads who teach them to ride bikes or play catch. He doesn't understand why his is missing. What do you tell them? That families come in all shapes. That sometimes grown-ups make choices that have nothing to do with the children. Melissa brushed away a tear. But it doesn't really answer the question in their hearts, you know? Why aren't they enough for him to want to know them? Evelyn reached over, taking Melissa's hand in her own. The gesture, once so foreign to her carefully maintained personal boundaries, now felt natural. They're more than enough. Alexander is the one who isn't enough for them. 5 days before the wedding, as they were finalizing their preparations, Evelyn received a text from a childhood friend who still moved in Alexander's social circles. He's telling everyone you had a nervous breakdown, that you're unstable. Be careful, Ev. He's out for blood. Melissa found her staring at the message, a chill running through her despite the warm spring day. What is it? Evelyn showed her the text. He's setting the stage, making sure that whatever we say will be dismissed as the ravings of a jilted, unstable woman. It's a classic abuser tactic, Melissa said, her doctor's analytical mind taking over. Discredit the victim before they can speak out. I'm not his victim, Evelyn said firmly, though her voice shook slightly. I'm the one who walked away, and that's what makes you dangerous to him. Melissa sat beside her on the couch. You know, when I left Alexander, I lost friends. People I thought would stand by me suddenly couldn't return my calls. One woman, someone I'd known since medical school, told me she couldn't risk her husband's business relationship with Alexander by staying friends with me. I'm starting to understand how isolated you must have felt, Evelyn said softly. It was like being excommunicated from a church. One day you're an insider, the next you're persona non grata. Melissa's expression grew distant. The hardest part wasn't the financial struggle or even the career sabotage. It was realizing how conditional those relationships had been all along. Evelyn thought of her own social circle, the carefully curated network of connections her mother had deemed appropriate, the friendships based on mutual benefit rather than genuine affection. How many would remain after her public break from Alexander? I'm afraid, she admitted, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. Evelyn Park didn't admit fear, didn't acknowledge weakness. Not of Alexander exactly, but of who I'll be without all the things that have defined me. The family name, the social position, the financial security. Melissa studied her face. You know what I see when I look at you now? Not Alexander Chen's ex-fiancée or Elizabeth Park's daughter. I see the woman who helps Emma with her dinosaur names, who patiently taught Noah how to tie his shoes yesterday, who chose what's right over what's easy. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, but she didn't brush them away. Another new freedom, allowing herself to be seen in a moment of vulnerability. We're going to get through this? Melissa continued, gripping Evelyn's hand tightly. Both of us. And when it's over, you'll discover who you really are beneath all those expectations and obligations. That's the true freedom. The next morning, Evelyn woke to Noah standing beside her makeshift bed on the pull-out couch, his serious little face inches from hers. Ms. Evelyn, he whispered, though it was more of a stage whisper that could probably be heard throughout the apartment. Are you awake? She blinked sleep from her eyes. I am now, she whispered back. What's up, buddy? I made you something. He thrust a piece of paper toward her. It's for your sad. Evelyn sat up, taking the offered drawing. On it, Noah had drawn 4 figures holding hands. Melissa, Emma, himself, and a figure with long dark hair that was clearly meant to be Evelyn. See, it's our family, he explained solemnly. Mom said you're sad because your old family was mean, but you can share our family if you want. The simple kindness hit Evelyn with such force that she couldn't speak for a moment. This child, this wonderful, perceptive child whom Alexander had. Rejected was offering her the very thing she had just confessed to fearing, the loss of belonging. "Noah," she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. "This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me." "Really?" His face lit up. "Better than grown-up presents like jewelry and stuff?" "Much better," she assured him, opening her arms. Noah climbed onto the couch beside her, nestling against her side with the easy trust of childhood. When Melissa found them there a half-hour later, Evelyn reading a story from Noah's favorite book about space exploration, she paused in the doorway, watching the scene with a complex expression. "Mom," Noah called when he noticed her. "Ms. Evelyn says I should be an astronomer when I grow up because I ask really good questions about black holes." "That doesn't surprise me at all," Melissa smiled. "You've always been my little scientist." Later, as they prepared breakfast together, Melissa bumped her hip gently against Evelyn's. "You're good with him," she said quietly. "With both of them." "They make it easy," Evelyn replied, surprised by how true it was. "They're so real. No pretense, no hidden agendas. Just themselves. That's how children are before the world teaches them otherwise," Melissa said. "Something to remember when we face Alexander." That afternoon, as they made final preparations for the upcoming confrontation, Evelyn received another text, this one from Alexander himself. "The Park family has stood for excellence for generations. Your father built his reputation on integrity. Would he want his daughter associated with extortion and theft? Think carefully about your next move, Evelyn. Some mistakes can't be undone." She showed it to Melissa, her hand trembling slightly. "He's bringing my father into this, threatening his reputation." "He's desperate," Melissa observed. "Men like Alexander only resort to family threats when they're running out of options." "It might work, though," Evelyn admitted. "My father's banking reputation is everything to him." "Then we need to make sure we protect it," Melissa said firmly. "This isn't about destroying Alexander, remember? It's about truth. About doing what's right for Noah and Emma." Evelyn nodded slowly, a plan forming in her mind. "You're right, and I think I know exactly how to approach this." She looked up at Melissa, a new determination in her eyes. "We need to change our strategy slightly. Make it about the children, not about revenge." As they talked into the night, revising and refining their approach, Evelyn felt something shift within her. A strengthening of resolve, yes, but also something more fundamental. In losing everything she had once thought essential, status, wealth, family approval, she had gained something she never knew she needed: authentic connection. 3 days before the wedding that would never happen, Evelyn Park sat across from a woman who had once loved the same man she had, playing card games with children who should have been her stepchildren, in an apartment that contained more genuine warmth than all the luxury homes she had ever inhabited. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Melissa asked, fastening the buttons on Noah's small blue blazer. The children had been told they were going to a special party, though not the full complexity of what awaited them. Evelyn knelt to straighten Emma's headband, brushing a strand of dark hair behind the little girl's ear. "We've been over the plan a dozen times. This is our only chance to make Alexander face the truth publicly, where he can't control the narrative." "I know." Melissa's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her son's collar. "I'm just worried about how it might affect the twins." Evelyn understood her concern. They had argued about this point repeatedly over the past days, whether bringing Noah and Emma to the confrontation was necessary or potentially harmful. In the end, they had agreed that the children would attend the beginning of the event, but would be taken home by Sarah, Melissa's lawyer friend, before things became too intense. "We'll protect them," Evelyn promised, her gaze steady as it met Melissa's. "Sarah will take them the moment Alexander appears. They won't witness any ugliness." Melissa nodded, smoothing down her simple but elegant navy dress, the most formal outfit she owned, purchased years ago for a medical conference. Against Evelyn's insistence, she had refused to let her friend buy her something more elaborate for the occasion. "We're not there to blend in with high society," Melissa had argued. "We're there to speak truth to power. I want to do that as myself, not in borrowed finery." Emma twirled in her pale yellow dress, her face bright with excitement. "Are we going to a castle?" "Noah says it's going to be like a castle with princesses." "It's a vineyard, sweetie," Melissa corrected gently. "A beautiful place where grown-ups sometimes have parties." "Will there be other kids?" Noah asked, already looking uncomfortable in his formal clothes. Evelyn and Melissa exchanged a glance. "Probably not many," Evelyn admitted. "But it won't be for very long. And afterward, Sarah will take you for ice cream while your mom and I finish some grown-up business." This promise seemed to satisfy Noah, though he still fidgeted with his bow tie. As they gathered their things, Evelyn's phone buzzed with a text from her inside source, a catering assistant who had agreed to keep her updated on the wedding preparations. "Groom arrived 30 minutes ago. Looks tense. Asking staff if there have been any unusual visitors." "He's nervous," Evelyn said, showing Melissa the message. "He knows we might be planning something." "Good," Melissa replied with uncharacteristic fierceness. "Let him sweat." The drive to the vineyard took them through the rolling hills of Napa, spring greenery erupting across the landscape. Evelyn directed Melissa down a service road that would bring them to the back entrance of the property, avoiding the main security checkpoint where Alexander had undoubtedly stationed people to watch for them. "There's Sarah." Evelyn pointed to a sleek black car parked discreetly under an oak tree where they had arranged to meet. The lawyer stepped out as they approached, her expression a mix of determination and concern. "Everything's set," Sarah reported, handing Evelyn a folder. "I filed the emergency petition this morning." Judge Reynolds was interested in the evidence, to say the least. "Thank you," Evelyn breathed, the weight of what they were about to do settling heavily on her shoulders. They reviewed the plan one last time. Sarah would wait with the twins near the side entrance to the reception tent. Melissa and Evelyn would enter together just as the ceremony was scheduled to begin. Their timing had to be perfect, dramatic enough to make a public statement, but controlled enough to protect the children. As they crested the final hill and the vineyard estate came into view, Evelyn felt her breath catch. Alexander had spared no expense. The sprawling property had been transformed into a fairy tale landscape, with thousands of white roses and orchids woven around ancient oak trees. Rows of white chairs faced an elaborate floral arch where the ceremony would take place. Beyond that, enormous clear tents housed elegantly set tables for 600 guests. "Whoa!" Noah breathed from the back seat. "It really is like a castle." Melissa parked in the spot their inside contact had reserved for them, hidden from the main valet area but providing easy access to the ceremony space. As they stepped out, the distant sound of a string quartet floated on the breeze. "The ceremony starts in 20 minutes, Evelyn said, checking her watch. "Guests should all be seated by now." They made their way carefully along a side path, Melissa and Evelyn each holding one of the twins' hands. When they reached the meeting point with Sarah, Melissa knelt down in front of her children. "Remember what we talked about," she said softly. "You're going to stay with Ms. Sarah while Ms. Evelyn and I talk to some people. It might get a little loud or confusing, but everything will be okay." "Are we going to meet our dad?" Noah asked suddenly, his serious eyes fixed on his mother's face. The question hung in the air between them. Melissa had explained, in age-appropriate terms, that they would be seeing their father today, but might not get to speak with him right away. "You'll see him," Melissa confirmed, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "But remember what I said. Grown-ups have complicated feelings sometimes, and he might be surprised to see you." "Because he didn't know about us?" Emma asked, repeating what she'd been told. "Something like that," Melissa said, brushing a hand over her daughter's hair. "Just remember that no matter what happens, I love you both more than anything in the world." She embraced each child tightly, then stood and nodded to Sarah, who took their hands. "We'll be at the ice cream shop in St. Helena," Sarah confirmed. "Just text when you're done." As Sarah led the twins away, Melissa took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "I can't believe we're actually doing this." "Having second thoughts?" Evelyn asked gently. "No," Melissa's voice firmed. 5 years of silence is enough. It's time for the truth." They rounded the corner of the reception tent, staying hidden behind an elaborate flower display as they surveyed the scene. Hundreds of guests in formal attire were seated in neat rows before the ceremonial arch. At the front, Alexander stood with his groomsmen, resplendent in a custom tuxedo. His face set in the confident expression of a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. Evelyn spotted her parents in the front row, her mother's rigid posture betraying her tension even from a distance. The empty seat beside them, where Evelyn should have been sitting, seemed to mock the perfect tableau. "There's my signal," Evelyn whispered as she noticed her catering contact discreetly touch her ear 3 times, their arranged gesture indicating that the bride was about to make her entrance. "Are you ready?" Melissa nodded, her face pale but determined. "As ready as I'll ever be." The string quartet transitioned to the wedding march. The guests rose in unison, turning expectantly toward the back of the aisle where Evelyn should have appeared in her designer gown. Instead, after a moment of confused murmuring, Evelyn and Melissa stepped out from behind the floral display and began walking steadily up the center aisle. The reaction was immediate: gasps, whispers, the rustle of expensive fabric as people turned to stare. Alexander's face, when he caught sight of them, transformed from practiced serenity to shock and then cold fury in the span of seconds. "Security," he barked, gesturing to the black-suited men positioned discreetly around the perimeter. 2 moved forward immediately, but Evelyn was prepared. "I wouldn't," she called loudly, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent gathering. "Unless you want tonight's society pages to feature pictures of your security team physically removing your former fiancé from what was supposed to be her wedding." The security men hesitated, looking to Alexander for guidance. He gave a subtle shake of his head, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched visibly along its edge. Evelyn and Melissa continued their deliberate walk toward the front, stopping about 10 feet from where Alexander stood. The crowd remained frozen in a tableau of horrified fascination. "What is the meaning of this?" Alexander's voice was low and dangerous, pitched to carry to them but not to the back rows. "Hello, Alexander," Melissa said calmly. "It's been a while." His eyes narrowed as they fixed on her. "You have no right to be here." "Actually," Evelyn countered, "she has every right. In fact, she's the only one who has a legitimate claim on you." She turned to face the stunned crowd. "For those who don't know, this is Dr. Melissa Thompson, Alexander's former partner of 5 years and the mother of his children." The collective intake of breath was audible. Elizabeth Park half rose from her seat, her face ashen, before Richard Park pulled her firmly back down. Alexander stepped forward, his practiced smile now firmly in place. "I apologize for this disruption, everyone," he announced. "It seems my ex-fiancé is experiencing some emotional difficulties." "Don't you dare," Evelyn cut him off, her voice like steel. "Don't you dare try to dismiss this as female hysteria." She turned back to the crowd. "Alexander has children, twins, a boy and a girl 4 years old. Children he has never acknowledged, never supported, never even met. These allegations are absurd," Alexander countered smoothly, "and certainly not appropriate for a public forum." "Evelyn, if you would please." "We have DNA tests," Melissa interjected, pulling a document from her purse. "And evidence that you've known about the children for over a year. Evidence that you offered me money to keep them a secret forever." Alexander's mask slipped momentarily, raw anger flashing across his features before he regained control. "These personal matters." "Personal?" Evelyn laughed, the sound brittle in the tense atmosphere. "Like how you personally sabotaged Melissa's medical career after she chose her fellowship over your possessive demands. Like how you personally blacklisted her at every major hospital in the Bay Area." The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. Several of the hospital board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Or perhaps," Evelyn continued, her voice growing stronger, "you mean personal, like the files I found detailing exactly how our marriage would help secure the zoning variances you need for your next development project? How my family's banking connections would facilitate the overseas transfers your regular channels couldn't manage." Richard Park stood abruptly. "That's enough," he barked. Evelyn, this is neither the time nor place. It's exactly the time and place, father, Evelyn countered. In front of all the people Alexander wanted to impress with his perfect life, his perfect bride, his perfect image. She turned back to Alexander. The difference between you and me is that I finally realized there are more important things than appearances. Alexander's composure cracked further. You have no idea what you're doing, he hissed. The damage you're causing. To your reputation? Melissa stepped forward. To your business deals? What about the damage you've done to Noah and Emma by denying their very existence? Something shifted in Alexander's expression at the mention of the children's names, a flicker of something almost human breaking through his calculated exterior. You named him Noah? He asked, his voice suddenly quieter. After my father, Melissa confirmed, momentary confusion crossing her face at this unexpected response. Alexander seemed about to say something further when Elizabeth Park rose from her seat, her social training finally reasserting itself amid the chaos. Perhaps we should continue this discussion privately, she suggested with brittle politeness. Our guests have been subjected to enough irregularity. Actually, came a new voice from the side of the gathering. I think this conversation is just getting interesting. All heads turned to see an elegant woman in her 60s making her way toward them. Joan Chen, Alexander's mother, who had been notably absent from most of the wedding planning. Mother, Alexander acknowledged stiffly. This isn't twins, Alexander? Joan interrupted, her gaze fixed on her son with an intensity that silenced him instantly. You have children, my grandchildren, that you've hidden from me for 4 years? The dynamic shifted palpably as Joan Chen approached Melissa. You are their mother? She asked directly. Yes, Melissa answered, standing straighter under the older woman's scrutiny. Noah and Emma. Where are they now? Nearby with a friend. I didn't want them to witness this. Melissa gestured to the chaotic scene around them. Joan nodded approvingly. A wise decision. She turned back to her son, switching rapidly to Mandarin, her words sharp and clipped. Alexander responded defensively, his own Mandarin equally heated. The exchange continued for nearly a minute, leaving the assembled guests in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Joan reverted to English. My son appears to have forgotten certain fundamental values about family. She addressed Melissa directly. I would like to meet my grandchildren. Today, if possible. Melissa glanced at Evelyn, who gave a small nod of encouragement. They're at an ice cream shop in St. Helena, Melissa told Joan. I can arrange it. Good. Joan turned to the assembled guests. I apologize for this unfortunate situation. It seems there will be no wedding today. Her gaze swept over Alexander with unmistakable disappointment before returning to Melissa. But perhaps there can be the beginning of something else. Something honest. Alexander stepped forward, his face a mask of rigid control. Mother, you can't possibly... Enough. Joan cut him off with a sharp gesture. You have embarrassed our family name with this behavior. Denying your own children? Using your influence to harm their mother. She shook her head. Your father would be ashamed. The mention of his deceased father seemed to strike Alexander like a physical blow. For the first time, he appeared genuinely affected rather than simply calculating his next move. Evelyn, watching this unexpected turn of events, caught her mother's eye across the gathering. Elizabeth Park's expression was unreadable. A complex mixture of shock, embarrassment, and something that might have been the barest hint of reluctant respect. I believe, Evelyn said into the tense silence, that we've said what we came to say. She looked around at the stunned faces of San Francisco's elite, people whose approval she had sought her entire life, whose judgment she had feared only days ago. Now, their opinions seemed curiously unimportant compared to the truth standing revealed between them all. As Melissa and Evelyn turned to leave, accompanied by Joan Chen, Alexander finally found his voice again. This isn't over, he called after them, the words eerily echoing what he had said to Evelyn the night she had walked out of his penthouse. You've made a spectacle that solved nothing. Evelyn paused, looking back at the man she had almost married. "You're wrong, Alexander," she said calmly. "It's completely over, and we've solved everything that matters." As they walked away from the elaborate wedding that would never happen, leaving behind the shocked murmurs and the disintegrating social facade, Melissa reached for Evelyn's hand, squeezing it tightly. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. Evelyn considered the question seriously. She had just publicly burned her entire social world to the ground. Her family would likely disown her. Her former friends would certainly distance themselves. Her financial future was uncertain at best. And yet, yes, she realized with genuine surprise, "I actually am." "They have your eyes," Evelyn said quietly to Joan as they approached the shop, its cheerful striped awning visible ahead. "Noah especially, that same intensity." Joan's composed expression softened slightly. "Chin men have always had that look. My husband had it too." Could see right through pretense with a single glance. She turned to Melissa, her gait steady despite her age. "Were there complications with the birth?" "Some," Melissa admitted. "They came 6 weeks early. Noah had respiratory issues for the first few days." "And my son knew nothing of this?" Joan's voice held a careful neutrality. "I tried to tell him," Melissa replied, "many times, but he had already erased you," Joan finished, her mouth tightening into a thin line. "Alexander has always been efficient at compartmentalizing unwanted complications." They reached the ice cream shop, pausing outside its large windows. Inside, Noah and Emma sat at a small table with Sarah, their faces animated as they enjoyed enormous sundaes, blissfully unaware of the life-altering confrontation that had just taken place. "They seem happy," Joan observed. "They are," Melissa said, a fierce pride in her voice. "Despite everything, they're healthy, well-adjusted, brilliant children." "May I?" Joan hesitated, an uncharacteristic uncertainty crossing her aristocratic features. "I understand if you prefer I not meet them today. The circumstances are already overwhelming." Melissa studied the older woman carefully. "They should know their grandmother. But I need to be clear, if you come into their lives, it can't be temporarily. They've had enough uncertainty." "Family is permanent," Joan stated simply. "Whatever my son's failings, I was raised with different values." Evelyn watched this exchange with a curious detachment, suddenly aware that her role in this unfolding drama was shifting. She had been central to the confrontation, but this moment, this beginning of a new family configuration, belonged to Melissa, Joan, and the twins. As if sensing her thoughts, Melissa turned to her. "Come in with us," she said, reaching for Evelyn's hand. "You're part of this too." The cool interior of the ice cream shop greeted them with the sweet scent of sugar and vanilla. Noah spotted them first, his ice cream spoon freezing midway to his mouth as he registered not just his mother, but Evelyn and a stranger as well. "Mom!" Emma called, waving enthusiastically, chocolate sauce smeared across one cheek. "We got triple scoops because Miss Sarah said it was a special occasion." "I see that," Melissa smiled, moving to their table. Sarah stood immediately, reading the tension in their faces. "How did it go?" she asked quietly. "About as expected," Melissa replied. "Maybe even better in some ways." She gestured toward Joan. "This is Alexander's mother, Joan Chin, Noah and Emma's grandmother." Sarah's eyebrows rose in surprise, but she nodded professionally. "I'll wait outside. Take your time." With a reassuring squeeze to Melissa's arm, she slipped out of the shop. Noah was studying Joan with undisguised curiosity. "Are you really our grandma?" he asked directly, the Chun intensity in his gaze unmistakable. Joan approached the table slowly, as one might approach a wild creature, and knelt to meet Noah at eye level despite her expensive silk dress. "Yes," she said simply. "I am your father's mother." "We don't have a father," Emma declared matter-of-factly, licking chocolate from her spoon. "Just Mom, and now Ms. Evelyn sometimes." Joan's eyes flicked briefly to Evelyn before returning to Emma. "Everyone has a father, even if they don't know them." "Our father doesn't want to meet us," Noah said, his voice small but steady. Mom said he's too busy. A flash of pain crossed Joan's composed features. Your father, she began, then paused, clearly weighing her words carefully. Your father has made many mistakes, but I am very much looking forward to knowing you both. Do you like dinosaurs? Emma asked, the ultimate test of character in her 4-year-old judgment. I find them fascinating, Joan replied with perfect seriousness, particularly the feathered ones that evolved into modern birds. This was apparently the right answer, as Emma's face lit up. I have 17 dinosaur toys, and a book that shows their skeletons inside. Perhaps you could show me sometime, Joan suggested, a genuine warmth entering her voice for the first time. Evelyn stood slightly apart, watching this tentative beginning of connection. Her phone buzzed in her purse, a series of notifications flooding in now that the initial shock of the aborted wedding was spreading. She ignored them, turning instead to look out the window at the peaceful street. The scene at the vineyard must be chaos by now, she thought. Alexander would be in damage control mode, her parents navigating the social catastrophe. For a moment, she felt a pang of guilt for the innocent guests caught in their dramatic confrontation. Then she remembered the twins' faces when they asked about their absent father, and the guilt evaporated. You're quiet, Melissa observed, appearing beside her at the window. Behind them, Joan had taken a seat at the table and was listening intently as Noah explained the complexities of his latest space project. Just processing, Evelyn admitted. It doesn't feel quite real yet. No, Melissa agreed. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Alexander to appear with lawyers or security or... He won't, Evelyn said with sudden certainty. Not today, at least. Joan's presence changes everything. He'll need to regroup, rethink his strategy. Melissa studied her face. You know him well. I thought I did. Evelyn's gaze returned to the peaceful street outside. But I'm realizing I only knew the version of himself he wanted me to see, just like everyone else. Except his mother, apparently. Melissa noted with a hint of dry humor. That was unexpected. Asian mothers, Evelyn said, a small smile lifting the corner of her mouth. Mine would have crucified me publicly, then privately arranged everything to minimize the scandal. Joan seems to have different priorities. She asked if she could see them regularly, Melissa confided. Set up a trust for their education. Be involved in their lives. How do you feel about that? Cautious, but open. They deserve to know their heritage, their family history. Melissa glanced back at the table where Joan was now showing Emma proper posture while eating ice cream. And she clearly has no intention of letting Alexander sweep them under the rug. The bell above the shop door jingled, and Sarah stepped back inside, an apologetic expression on her face. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation developing. She lowered her voice. Alexander's car just pulled into town. One of my paralegals spotted it heading this way. Evelyn and Melissa exchanged alarmed glances. How did he know where to find us? Melissa asked. Tracking software, probably, Evelyn realized. He must have put it on my phone when we were together. She pulled out her phone, suddenly understanding why he had always insisted on upgrading her devices himself. We should go, Melissa said, moving toward the table where the children were still chatting with Joan. Alexander's on his way here. Joan's expression sharpened. Already? That was faster than I expected. We need to leave before he arrives, Melissa insisted, her protective instincts flaring. I don't want the twins' first meeting with him to be like this. No, Joan said firmly, rising from her seat. Let him come. Joan, I appreciate your confidence, but... Melissa, Joan's voice was gentle but unyielding. Running now only postpones the inevitable. Better to set boundaries clearly, immediately. Evelyn moved to the window, scanning the street. There, she said, spotting the sleek black Tesla pulling up outside. He's here. A strange calm descended over their small group. Sarah moved protectively closer to the twins, while Joan straightened her already perfect posture. Melissa took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "Noah, Emma," she said quietly. "Someone is coming to meet us. Someone important. I need you both to stay with Miss Sarah while the grown-ups talk. Okay?" The twins nodded solemnly, sensing the change in atmosphere. Evelyn moved to stand beside Melissa, their shoulders nearly touching. A silent message of solidarity. The shop door opened, and Alexander Chun stepped inside. He had removed his formal jacket and bow tie, but otherwise looked as impeccable as ever, despite the circumstances. His eyes scanned the shop quickly, taking in everyone's position with the strategic assessment that had made him a business titan. "Mother," he acknowledged first, his voice carefully controlled. "That was quite a scene you caused." "That I caused?" Joan's eyebrow raised delicately. "Interesting interpretation." Alexander's gaze shifted to Melissa, then Evelyn, before finally landing on the twins. For a moment, just a moment, his composed mask slipped, revealing something raw and almost vulnerable. "These are," he began, then stopped, clearly unsure how to proceed. "Your children," Melissa supplied, her voice steady. "Noah and Emma." The twins were watching Alexander with undisguised curiosity. Emma whispered something to Noah, who nodded seriously in response. "We should discuss this privately," Alexander said finally, his business persona reasserting itself. "Without an audience." "No," Melissa replied simply. "Whatever you have to say can be said here. I'm done with secrets." Alexander's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Noah suddenly stood up from his chair and walked directly up to him, stopping just a foot away. With the fearless directness of childhood, he looked up at Alexander and asked, "Are you my dad?" The shop fell absolutely silent. Alexander stared down at the boy, his own serious eyes reflected back at him, his own determined chin, his own analytical gaze. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Alexander Chun seemed genuinely at a loss for words. "It's okay if you don't want to be," Noah continued, his small voice remarkably steady. "Mom says some grown-ups aren't ready to be parents. But I thought maybe you didn't know about us. So now you do." The simple dignity of the child's statement hung in the air. Emma, not to be outdone by her brother, slid off her chair and joined him. "I'm Emma," she announced, sticking out her small hand as she had been taught to do when meeting adults. "I'm 4 3/4. I like dinosaurs and swimming and math." Alexander looked down at the offered hand as if it were an alien artifact. Slowly, almost mechanically, he extended his own hand and shook his daughter's much smaller one. "Alexander Chun," he said, his voice oddly formal. "I like math too." Emma beamed. "I can count to 100 in twos. Want to hear?" "Perhaps another time, Emma," Joan interjected gently. "Mr. Chun and your mother need to have a grown-up conversation first." Alexander's gaze snapped back to his mother, something like betrayal flashing in his eyes. "You're taking their side?" "This isn't about sides, Alexander," Joan replied. "This is about responsibilities. Ones you've neglected for far too long." He turned to Melissa, his expression hardening. "Is this what you wanted to ambush me with?" He gestured toward the twins. "With emotional manipulation, what I wanted," Melissa said evenly, "was for you to acknowledge your children years ago when I first told you I was pregnant. What I wanted was for you to support them, know them, love them." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "What I wanted was for you to be a decent human being, but apparently that was too much to ask." Alexander's gaze shifted to Evelyn. "And you? Was this revenge for the prenup? For the business connections? You could have just asked for more money." "This was never about money," Evelyn replied quietly. "It was about truth. Something I'm not sure you've ever really valued." "The truth?" Alexander laughed bitterly. "The truth is that you've destroyed years of carefully built business relationships in a single afternoon. The truth is that your little scene at the wedding has already cost my company millions in a tanked stock price. The truth is that you're still focusing on all the wrong things." Evelyn interrupted. "Look at your children, Alexander. Really look at them. That's the only truth that matters right now. Almost reluctantly, Alexander's gaze returned to Noah and Emma, who were watching the adult conversation with solemn intensity. "You have your grandmother's eyes," he said finally to Emma, his voice slightly softer. "And her stubbornness, I suspect." Emma straightened proudly at the comparison to Joan, whom she had clearly already decided was someone worthy of admiration. "What happens now?" Melissa asked, breaking the tense silence that followed. "Because I want to be very clear, if you're going to be in their lives, it needs to be consistent. No disappearing when it becomes inconvenient. No hiding them from your business associates. No more legal maneuvers to keep them secret." Alexander seemed about to deliver a cutting response when Joan placed a restraining hand on his arm. "My son will do the right thing," she said, her tone making it clear this was not a prediction but a command. Beginning with formal acknowledgement and support, she turned to Alexander, and a proper introduction to his children, not in an ice cream shop after a scandal, but in a dignified manner befitting their position as Chens. Alexander looked from his mother to the twins, then to Melissa. Something complicated worked behind his eyes, calculations, assessments, the weighing of options that had always been his default approach to life. But when Noah stepped forward again, looking up at him with those mirror image eyes, something else flickered across Alexander's face. Something that looked almost like recognition. "Would you like to see my spaceship drawing?" Noah asked hopefully. "Mom put it on the refrigerator because she said it was exceptional." He sounded out the word carefully, clearly proud of using it correctly. For a long moment Alexander didn't respond. Then, with a slight nod, he said, "I would like that, yes." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even acceptance, not really. But it was a beginning, small and fragile and uncertain, but a beginning nonetheless. As the tension in the room began to dissipate slightly, Evelyn felt a sudden wave of exhaustion wash over her. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation at the wedding was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. "I think I need some air," she murmured to Melissa, slipping quietly toward the door as Alexander awkwardly began looking at pictures of Noah's artwork on Melissa's phone. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quaint street. Evelyn leaned against the building, closing her eyes and taking her first truly deep breath in what felt like days. "You're leaving." Evelyn opened her eyes to find Sarah standing beside her, a knowing look on the lawyer's face. "Not permanently," Evelyn clarified. "Just, I need some space. This part of the story isn't mine." Sarah nodded understandingly. "What will you do now? Go back to your parents?" "No." The answer came immediately with surprising certainty. "That chapter is closed, at least for now. Alexander's legal team will be aggressive," Sarah warned. "Those documents you took, he'll want them back. There could be lawsuits, counter-accusations." "Let them come," Evelyn said, a new steadiness in her voice. "I've faced worse now. The fear of losing everything. I've already walked through that fire." The door to the ice cream shop opened, and Melissa stepped out, concern evident on her face. "You okay?" "Just needed some air," Evelyn assured her. "How's it going in there?" "Awkward. Tense." Joan is somehow managing to be both supportive of the twins and subtly threatening to Alexander. A small smile touched Melissa's lips. "I think I might actually like her. She's formidable," Evelyn agreed. "In a different way than Alexander." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the late afternoon light play across the storefronts. "What happens now?" Evelyn finally asked, echoing Melissa's earlier question to Alexander. "With all of us, I mean." Melissa considered this. "Joan wants to establish a proper relationship with the twins. Alexander, I think he's still in shock, honestly. It might take time for